LS. To most people, these are just two random letters in the alphabet. But to a car enthusiast, to us, these two letters hold immense weight. We know the letters LS as the third and fourth generation small block Chevy engines. Much like the small blocks before it, the LS has developed quite the reputation as the go-to engine for the car community. But is the LS really worth our time and money? Welcome to Power Rankings. This series answers one question. What are the best engines for those of us who want the best in our cars? We examine a variety of engines and rank and categorize them according to, well, what matters to us as car enthusiasts. We look at their strength, reliability, availability, tuning potential, and cost, all with the goal of determining which legendary engines provide the most real-world impact.
At the North American International Auto Show on January 6, 1997, Chevrolet revealed to the world the most advanced Corvette produced to date. The C5 generation of the Corvette brought a legion of upgrades over the outgoing C4. But arguably the changes under the fiberglass hood would forever impact car enthusiasts around the world. Powering the C5 Corvette, the LS1, was a clean sheet design sharing only two components from the previous second-generation small block Chevy engine. The third-generation small block Chevy was a thoroughly modernized engine, featuring deep side skirts, cross-bolted 6-bolt main bearing caps, and a composite intake manifold among many other advancements. Most surprising though, the LS still retained a cam and block pushrod design first introduced in 1955. Despite being considered technologically archaic, the LS family of engines have won the grueling 24 Hours of Le Mans 7 times and have spawned almost 40 different variants, cementing this engine's legacy on and off the track.
Before we rank the LS, we have to establish exactly what we here at Aperture think is an LS. For a bit of context, we actually have two different projects going on right now that both involve LSs. One of them is a 5.3 liter LM7.
The people's choice, right here.
And the other started life as a 6.0 LQ9, but after all the modifications and everything that's been done, basically the closest thing to it would be a crate motor that GM calls the LS364. Now, occasionally when we share our projects with members of the local car community, we are confronted and assaulted with this idea that
that greasy engine you pulled from the junkyard is not a real LS. It is a Vortec truck motor. And if you call it LS again, things are gonna get crazy.
people who typically for this type of argument have two main lines of reasoning. Firstly, people usually try to make the argument that LS engines are aluminum and Vortec engines are iron. But when you really start to research, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because the LSX, which is on top of all the other engines, it's the Halo model, that is an iron block. And then when you look at the more consumer grade products, about half of those models are aluminum. So it doesn't really seem to matter to GM based on if it's aluminum or iron block, if it's going to be called an LS or a Vortec. The other argument that people often use is people say that the Vortec engines only came in trucks and the LS engines only came in cars. But again, once you really start to look into it, it kind of falls flat. The 5th gen Camaro has both LS and Vortec engines. If you ordered a manual 5th gen Camaro, you got a LS3, but if your 5th gen Camaro was an automatic, it got a Vortec L99. Where does all of this confusion come from? Ever since its inception, the car community has always had the habit of giving car parts and even complete engines nicknames. Every crusty old guy at a car meet will tell you that his Corvette is all original and it has a LT1 in it. So where do these 3-digit codes come from? Well, these 3-digit codes are what's called RPO codes. Every GM vehicle has RPO codes. And the whole goal is, when you look at this huge matrix of 3-digit codes, It's how the dealership tells the factory to build your exact vehicle. And these RPO codes, from GM's perspective, aren't really that special.
Nope.
The LT1 RPO code has been reused 3 different times. So when the C5 Corvette came out, the RPO code for the first Gen 3 small block was LS1. And, well, the car community latched on to that name forever. LS1, 2, 3, and whatever other engines are out there. GM officially calls those engines the Gen 3 and Gen 4 small blocks. GM branded most Gen 3 and Gen 4 engines as Vortec engines. And these are most typically what car enthusiasts will find, rather if that's in the junkyard or on Facebook Marketplace. All the parts between a quote-unquote Vortec and a real LS are interchangeable. For simplicity's sake, on this channel, going forward, we will simply refer to all Gen 3 and Gen 4 engines as LS engines. At the end of the day, the design of the LS is quite incredible. A lot of people will try to bag on these engines and say that the design of the engine is quite outdated and things are very similar to the way they were in 1955, but that's for a reason. The pushrod design is quite outdated in modern engineering standards, especially when comparing it to dual overhead cam, but the big advantage to this technology is that it allows the engine to be incredibly compact. So for our own personal projects, one of the swaps that we're doing is on a BMW E34. The engine that was originally in that car was a BMW M60. It's a 3-liter V8 that made 215 horsepower. The LS that we built to replace the M60, it has double the displacement and almost 3 times the power, but it's still somehow smaller than the factory engine. So pretty much any project that you're doing, a LS will fit in the engine bay. When looking at the design of the internals of the LS, things get even more wild. The LS has a semi-closed deck block, a deep skirted block as well, and it has 6 bolt main caps. So when you look at the construction of an LS, it has 4 bolts that go vertically and 2 bolts that go horizontally through the skirt of the block. Basically, that is holding that crankshaft in place, and it's not going anywhere. The crankshaft design is forged, and the rods are incredibly strong as well. Typically, the weak point is considered to be the pistons because they are hyper-eutectic pistons, but if you are running below 700 horsepower, you should be fine with whatever the bottom end of your LS has. Now, while we mentioned earlier that a big advantage for the LS is its pushrod design, which allows the engine to be smaller, the pushrod design can be considered to be a limiting factor in the performance of an LS in factory trim. In factory trim, pretty much every LS needs a head, cam, and intake upgrade. That is something to keep in mind in terms of designing your build, that the valve train will need to be upgraded. When it comes to reliability, there are several known issues with the LS platform. The common issue that always comes to mind with the LS platform, especially in the performance world, involves DOD and AFM. These so-called features were designed to lower emissions and increase fuel mileage, but as is kind of typical, whenever a manufacturer introduces a new technology to do both of those things, usually reliability suffers, and the LS is no different. Most engines in the Generation 3 family and under the LS RPO code are immune to having to deal with these issues as they didn't have these technologies installed from the factory. But if you are a car enthusiast on a budget searching for an option for your project, chances are you will encounter an engine with one of or both of these technologies installed. Other common issues that you may encounter with the LS include the factory oil pump cavitates when you go above 6,000 RPM. The LS7 had a nasty habit of dropping valves inside the engine. The lifters can be problematic on some of the earlier LS motors and destroy the camshaft. The intake manifold gaskets can leak, letting more air into the engine, which can result in the engine just running poorly or not being able to track down issues as to why the engine is running the way it is. The same with NOx sensors. NOx sensors can be problematic on this platform, and low oil pressure is common for the platform, especially with 5.3-liter LM7s. When looking at accessibility and availability, without a shadow of a doubt, if you live in the United States, the LS is probably the best decision for your project.
Time to do what must be done. I did it.
If you want a performance car that came from the factory with an LS, GM has you covered. There's the Corvette, Camaro, CTSV, GTO, G8, whole bunch of performance trucks, but where the LS truly shines at is its ability to be swapped into basically any car that's ever been created. When you're out there looking for an engine to swap into your project, chances are you're not going to run into halo models like the LSX or the LS7 or LS9. But if you lower your expectations to more realistic standpoints, the LS really begins to show its strengths in terms of availability and prevalence. And that's because the LS family of engines were commonly installed in GM pickup trucks and SUVs that you will easily find in any junkyard throughout the United States. When looking at availability in terms of replacement parts, OEM replacement parts are still readily available from dealers. That's because the LS was available up until about 2020, so these parts will be available for quite a while from the dealership. And if you're like me, where you are severely allergic to interacting with the dealership, you can go to pretty much any auto parts store and pick up some genuine AC Delco parts. AC Delco is actually owned by GM, so there are plenty of options for getting OEM parts back into your motor. The LS has an incredibly mature and robust aftermarket, and this leads to the LS platform being very friendly to those who are drawn to modify their powertrain. It doesn't really matter if you're looking for basic bolt-ons or you're looking for a complete engine build that's going to make 2,000 horsepower. It's really difficult to select an engine that's going to have more tuning potential than an LS engine. For your naturally aspirated builds, it's really easy to add up to 100 horsepower with just a simple head cam and intake swap. For our friends who like boost, very little is needed to be done to an LS in order to support low to medium boost levels. And LSA superchargers are perfect for this. They are factory OEM options and they're fairly easy to get on Facebook Marketplace. When looking at what aftermarket options exist for the LS really suffers from success, to the point where analysis paralysis is really the biggest obstacle to getting your build started. When it comes to tuning, the factory LS PCM can be suited to adapt most situations that your average car enthusiast runs into. But if your preference or your need requires that you use an aftermarket standalone engine controller, it's no secret that the Holley Terminator pretty much dominates the community. But there are plenty of options available from Heltec, Vitec, HP tuners, and Microsquirt. When it comes to engine swapping, no engine swap project is cheap. But if you are prepared to undertake an engine swap, the LS makes the most sense financially from two different standpoints. For one, LSs make a lot of sense when considering the financials from a cost per unit standpoint. Most brand new crate engine LSs are just as expensive as every other crate engine, but most people are going out and buying used engines rather from Facebook Marketplace or from the junkyard. And this is where the LS really holds a big advantage. When looking at the engine that we're currently building for the E34, we're only $1,000 spent at the junkyard right now. LS engines are also incredibly valuable when examining things from a horsepower to dollar standpoint. Our LQ9 with LS 3-cylinder heads, all we really need to add to that combination is a $400 camshaft, and it will easily make over 400 horsepower. So it's not even a comparison in terms of the value ratio of the LS. The LS family of engines scored 45 on our ranking scale. Ultimately, when considering all factors, the LS is an amazing candidate for your next project. We consider any and every version of the LS to be a must-own engine for those who enjoy doing engine modifications.